Okay, so I've made the decision to cut this door skin off. So how do you do that? What's involved with it? And how do you put a new one on? That's what's going to be in the next couple of videos that I make. So we can start off by talking about how we're going to cut this old door skin off. These door skins are held on. The front skin sheet metal is bent over, and this little flange is just spot welded to a corresponding flange on the door shell, and that runs up the side all along the bottom. It's kind of hard to see there, and then back up the other side. Down in the corner here you can see how they relieve it, and really you just have a little flat piece of sheet metal that makes up that lower corner, and then that flap runs all the way up the other side of the door. The top, believe it or not, is not actually attached to anything. Obviously there's the split there, the gap for the glass to go up and down, but this top door skin is not welded anywhere. It's just welded on the two sides and the bottom. So once you break that joint along the sides and the bottom, that piece just comes right off of the top. There is a little couple of brackets here that attach the top to the inner door shell. You have to cut those off, but once you cut those two brackets, the whole thing comes out. It's pretty simple to do. We're just going to take an angle grinder and grind the edge of this skin so that we grind through the metal that's been folded over all the way along, and then we'll take just a little flat bar or screwdriver, whatever you have, multi-tool, and just tap it along and split that seam. And once you split the seam, the front skin will come off, and then you'll just have to get a grinder and grind off the spot welds to take off the bent over flange that's left behind. So it's a pretty simple process. Let me go get the replacement door skin and show you some things on that you want to look at before you actually cut this one off. Here's the replacement door skin. You can see it's very close in the contour to the original one. It's supposed to be identical. These are pretty good. Later on we'll measure this door and compare the measurements to this skin, and you'll see that these are pretty close dimensionally to what you get on each car. There's a little bit of variation, but in general, dimensionally they're pretty close. They have some rough issues with the crispness of these body lines, and we'll talk about that more later. But I just wanted to show you that this is what it looks like when you buy it. It has all the outside contours. This is just dirt from these gloves that's getting on there, sanding dust from having sanded those door skin before. On the back side, see, it's got the flange at the top. It's got the holes pre-punched with a window felt. I've got the E-coat on both sides, so that gives you a little bit of corrosion protection. And up close, if you can see these, it's got the flanges on the edge of the door that you fold over. Those are pre-bent on both sides and the bottom. The sides are bent at pretty much 90 degrees. The bottom is a little less steep of an angle. So they obviously intend for you to do more bending on the bottom than you have to do on the sides. And in my experience, the sides go on pretty easy. The bottom is where you have the trouble, because it's such a long, flat, straight edge that you have to get. It's real easy to wind up with little puckers and little irregularities that you then have to work out. And that's where I spend most of my time, is this bottom edge. When you're handling these things, when you go to get one, have it shipped to you or something, always wear gloves. These edges are razor sharp, and if you bang your finger into that, you'll cut it open. I've done that, so now I always wear gloves. I cut my finger open on one of these, made a big cut, it bled a lot. So always be careful. You can really hurt yourself. I've already filed down these edges. They just punch these holes in the factory over in Taiwan, and they do a pretty good job cleaning them up, but there's they leave some burrs and some raised edges, so I've already filed all that down. There is one thing that I do want to point out right now, and it's has to do with this bottom edge. The flange on this bottom edge is not uniform. This is the third one of these skins that I've dealt with, and they're all the same. The width of the flange here at the bottom is wider at this end than it is at that end. Let me come grab the camera and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright, if you look, we're looking at the bottom of the door skin now. If you look at this flange that I'm going to have to fold over onto the bottom edge of the door, on this end we've got about 3/8, let's call it. And as I run down the door, I get 3/8, 3/8. By the time I get to this end over here, the far end, that flange width has been reduced down to 3/16 if I'm lucky. And the sharpness of the crease at this end has really gone away. And there's really no sharply defined crease on this bottom edge. You know, there's a point where they bent it in the factory, but I don't know if they put them in the machine crooked, or when the guy takes them out, you know, they do something to it, or they're just that's just how it's set up. But they're all like that. What that means is you have the potential for this flange not being long enough to reach the flange on the bottom of the door. Because if you remember, here's the factory door. If you look down here on the corner, you can see that the flange on these things, on the door skins, has to wrap over the flange on the door shell. And look how much of a lip is on this factory door. That's a good 3/8 of an inch all the way along. So if you have less than 3/8 on your skin, you could be in for a problem. You know, if we look down at this other end, you can see that the door shell is actually, it doesn't come out to the end of the skin. So the skin's crease is not at the edge of the door shell flange, which means you need some extra length on that door skin flange to fold over to even reach the flange on the door shell. So I know that mine is probably a little bit too short. And what can happen in that situation when you're flattening over your door skin and the flange isn't long enough, the edge of the flange on the skin that you folded over can pop out and go underneath the flange, which is essentially on top of it instead of behind it. And if you folded all along that edge and then a piece of it pops out and goes under, it's really difficult to get that door skin back over the top of that lip where it belongs. You don't want to bend the skin, and you don't want to bend the flange on the door shell, and you don't really want to try and unfold the skin after you bent it, so it can be a problem. So what I've done ahead of time on this one is I cut out a strip that's about 7/16 of an inch wide of just some flat sheet metal. I cut it off of an old door skin, and I'm going to weld this thing onto the bottom of this door skin. I'm going to weld that on. It's kind of hard for me to hold the camera in one hand and hold this thing in the other hand. But you get the idea. I'm going to weld that on there like this and give myself a nice wide flange so that when I fold it over, I've got some extra metal on there to make sure that my flange on my door skin overlaps the flange on the door shell. Alright, so now that we've done all of the prep work for cutting this door skin off of this door, the last thing that I'm going to do before I cut it off is clean up the outside of this door shell. If you look here, it's got a little bit of light rust on the top, probably where somebody put their arm on it while they were riding around with the window down. It looks like the spot where that would happen. And then behind the door panel, there's some kind of a sealer, like a caulk or a putty kind of material. And I'm gonna clean all that up. You don't really have to worry too much about cleaning the area behind the door's panel to a perfect, pristine condition. I'm just going to get all this dirt and gunk off of here. I'm going to certainly clean the area around the outside of the door panel because we're going to want to paint that. But you have to be careful cleaning that off. This steel in here is actually stamped with a little pattern to sort of give it the look of like a leather, but it's got a little bit of grain stamped into the steel. And if you get aggressive with some kind of a hard grinder, you know, like a wire wheel or something, you might actually grind that pattern off. So just be careful when you're doing that. But before we cut this old skin off, you know, we're gonna be manhandling this door around, throwing it around to clean the edges off, clean the bottom off, picking it up, down. And, you know, why do all of that when my new skin is on and I run the risk of damaging it, putting a dent in it that I have to fix later? So I'll stop now, clean this all up, then we'll cut the old skin off, clean up the inside of the shell that you can't really get to right now, paint the inside, and then we'll put the skin on, and then, you know, paint the outside of it. So, you know, always just, you know, think ahead a little bit what you're going to do for your next step. If I would have rushed ahead and cut this thing off, you know, I probably could have cleaned up this side of the door shell with the skin off of it. But the skin helps hold everything stable, so there's less chance that I'm going to rack or twist or bend this door shell with this skin on it. So I'll stop before I cut this off, clean it all up, and then we'll come back and cut the door skin off to put on the brand new one.